Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the sun-baked, olive oil slicked world of the Middle Ages, where looking pretty wasn't just a hobby, it was a matter of life and death. Okay, not literally, but there were definitely moments when the stakes were higher than you might think. Picture yourself living in a time when beauty didn't mean a quick swipe of mascara and an Instagram filter, nope, in the medieval world. It meant enduring some serious discomfort, using some seriously strange ingredients, and crossing your fingers that you didn't accidentally poison yourself with the concoction your grandmother swore by. Spoiler. You probably won't survive this, so let's get into it and see how you'd fare if you had to fight for your beauty in the Middle Ages. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Alright, let's get real about beauty in the Middle Ages. We're not talking about the glammed up, Instagram-worthy version of beauty you see today, where a selfie ring light is basically the equivalent of a magic wand. Oh no. In the Middle Ages, achieving beauty was a much more intense affair, an endurance test, if you will. The first thing you'll notice is that people were deeply obsessed with beauty, but not in the way you might think. Beauty wasn't just about looking nice for the sake of it. It was a public display of your social rank. That's right, your beauty was essentially your personal brand. The richer you were, the better you looked, and the more time you could dedicate to pampering yourself for most folks. This meant slathering on whatever they could get their hands on, often with disastrous results. And let's not even get started on the whole let's make our face and body smell nice thing, because the medieval approach to hygiene was about as appealing as a rotten apple in a damp cellar. Medieval beauty routines were essentially a game of how many weird ingredients can we throw together before something explodes. You had the rich, who had access to oils and perfumes imported from distant lands. And then you had the rest of the population, who basically used whatever they could scrape together from the garden or their backyard. Oh, and the ingredients weren't exactly all natural. We're talking stuff like crocodile dung, yes, that's real, sulphur, and various questionable plant extracts. One misstep in your beauty routine, and you could find yourself looking less like a glowing goddess and more like someone who's been cursed by a witch. You might be thinking, okay, surely this wasn't as bad as it sounds. Right, so, but it was. It was very bad. The struggle to look pretty in the Middle Ages often involved putting dangerous substances on your skin, your hair, and let's be honest, pretty much everywhere. The problem wasn't just the lack of modern hygiene products. It was the complete absence of a basic understanding of what was actually good for you. Want to fight off wrinkles? Well, how about a mixture of fermented urine and burnt flowers? Sounds like a winner. Right, spoiler. It wasn't. Let's take a deeper dive into the world of medieval beauty and see just how far people were willing to go to look pretty. Remember, back then, beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was a badge of honour. It was about class, status, and yes, a little bit of narcissism. And if you weren't willing to risk your life to get that porcelain skin or perfect hair, well, you were probably considered a bit of a social outcast. First up, the hair. Ah, yes, medieval hair care, where the term hair care was, let's just say, generously used. If you were a noble woman or even a wealthy merchant's wife, you had access to all kinds of elaborate hair treatments. Think about oils and dyes that would make modern-day Pinterest boards jealous. But for the rest of the population, well, it was pretty much a free-for-all. You had people rubbing strange mixtures into their scalps in the hopes of preventing baldness or promoting hair growth. Hair loss was a big deal back then, especially for men, and the remedies were, let's call them creative. One common solution was the use of animal fat mixed with herbs, applied directly to the scalp. What could go wrong? Right, just a nice greasy layer of fat to kickstart your hair growth. In reality, it usually ended with clogged pores, itchy scalps, and very questionable odours. But hey, at least you tried. Meanwhile, if you were lucky enough to have hair or just wanted it to look shiny, you had to take extra care with it, after all. The Middle Ages didn't have blow dryers or straighteners. Forget about getting that sleek, modern look. Instead, hair was often treated with concoctions that range from the bizarre to the truly frightening. Imagine mixing honey with olive oil and massaging it into your scalp, hoping to achieve a glossy, shiny mane. The issue. It would take days to wash out, and half the time, you ended up with a sticky, greasy mess. And then there were wigs, oh yes. Wigs were all the rage in medieval Europe, especially among the wealthier classes. If you were wealthy enough to afford a wig, chances were it was made from the finest hair, carefully dyed and styled into the latest fashion. But if you were poor, you probably just had to make do with whatever natural hair you had left after slathering it in various oils, herbs, and even sometimes, wait for it, pig fat. Yes, people rubbed pig fat into their hair. No, this is not a typo. And yes, you probably would have ended up smelling like a butcher's shop, but hey, it was all part of the medieval charm. Now, let's talk about the face specifically. How to make it as pale as possible. You see, in the Middle Ages, pale skin was a sign of high social status. If you were pale, it meant you weren't working the fields or toiling away in some grimy workshop. You were rich enough to stay indoors and avoid the sun. So, what did people do to achieve that ghostly pallor? They didn't just apply sunscreen and hope for the best, because sunscreen wasn't exactly a thing back then. No, they went straight to the harsh stuff. Lead-based white makeup was a favourite, and applying it could result in a face as white as porcelain, but with a side of potential poisoning. Ladies and sometimes men would paint their faces with this deadly concoction, hoping to look as ethereal as possible. But guess what? That pale complexion often came with side effects like headaches, skin lesions, and even death if it was worn for too long. On the other side of the spectrum, you had people trying to add colour to their faces, since looking too pale wasn't always the goal. Some medieval women used red lead to colour their lips, while others turned to beet juice. If you had freckles or sunspots, you could dab on some combination of breadcrumbs, frankincense, and Greek pitch. Yes, this was all perfectly acceptable. It's just that the medieval approach to beauty had a lot to do with what you could get your hands on, and not a lot to do with actual skincare knowledge. In fact, many of these practices were downright dangerous. But hey, at least they were trying. And then, there's the matter of body odour. You probably didn't have to worry about body odour back in the 21st century. Just hop in the shower and you're good to go. But in the Middle Ages, showers were a luxury for the few who could afford them. And even then, they were kind of sketchy. Instead, people used herbs, oils, and sometimes even vinegar to mask their natural scent. Some even went to extreme lengths by using flower petals and sweet-smelling substances to create the illusion of freshness. But let's be honest, no matter how much lavender you sprinkled on, the real smell of medieval life sweat, unwashed bodies, and, let's not forget, the absence of proper plumbing was enough to knock you out. So, how did people get by? Well, they didn't really, but they did their best. And in a strange way, that's where the charm lies. People were doing everything they could to survive and maintain some semblance of dignity in a world that wasn't exactly friendly to hygiene. In conclusion, Beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't for the faint of heart, and it wasn't pretty. You'd have to fight for your look, probably get a few rashes or skin conditions along the way, and maybe even risk some serious health issues. But you'd probably end up looking, well, you'd end up looking something, and with that, you'd march on, proudly displaying your beauty however dangerous, however weird, and make your way through the world. Because in the Middle Ages, looking pretty wasn't just about the glow-up, it was about survival. Now that you're somehow still alive after the medieval beauty regimen, let's talk about someone who would have been less than thrilled about your attempts to turn your face into a porcelain mask, Galen. The ancient physician. Yes, that's right, Galen, the guy whose ideas were so influential that his medical treatments were used for centuries. Long after he was gone, if he could have seen you slathering lead-based makeup all over your face or mixing pig fat into your hair, you'd probably have gotten a lecture. So, let's buckle up, because you're about to get schooled by the man who considered himself the ultimate authority on all things health and didn't think much of the medieval obsession with cosmetics. Now, before you roll your eyes at me and think, great, another buzzkill in the history books, let's rewind a bit and remember why Galen was such a big deal. His contributions to medicine were so huge that they basically shaped medical thought for over 400 years. Galen was a physician, surgeon, philosopher, and even a bit of a drama queen when it came to the intersection of medicine and beauty. He believed that there was a fine line between health and appearance, and you absolutely couldn't cross it. In his mind, if you tried to improve your looks too much, you'd be tampering with nature. And, as we all know, that never ends well. So, what exactly did Galen have to say about medieval cosmetics? Well, he wasn't too happy about it. He thought that cosmetic treatments that altered the natural state of your body, like using lotions that lighten your skin or create artificial curls in your hair, were downright dangerous. According to Galen, beauty should come naturally. He argued that treatments meant to enhance your appearance should never mess with the natural functions of your body. He believed, in all seriousness, that messing with your looks too much was akin to depravity. A bit harsh maybe, but remember, this was the same guy who recommended bloodletting for almost everything. So you can see where his priorities lay. Galen didn't just look at beauty from a theoretical perspective, he saw its practical implications. He was very concerned about what people were putting on their skin and in their hair. His main beef was with the cosmetics that were being used to try and make people look younger, brighter, or just more polished. He didn't hold back in his criticism either. One of his famous quotes on the matter goes something like this: "The object of the cosmetic part of medicine is to produce an enhancement of beauty, while the object of the decorative part is to preserve everything natural in the body." Sounds like a beauty purist, right? But Galen did concede that there were times when cosmetics were necessary, like when dealing with royalty. Ah yes, the royalty exception. Apparently, if you were a king or queen, you could do whatever you wanted, and Galen would be all too happy to offer some of his own medicinal recipes to help with your beauty needs. You know, just in case a ruler got a little too bald or wanted to give their greying hair a youthful touch. He even had some remedies for curing baldness and colouring hair. But let's be real here, these were hardly miracle cures. If you were expecting a healthy head of hair after using Galen's magic potions, you were probably in for some major disappointment. Now, let's zoom in on some of the treatments that Galen would have given you. If you were royal enough to warrant his attention, you might have gotten a prescription for something a little more, shall we say, natural. He was all about ingredients that were readily available, such as olive oil and herbs. These were supposed to help rejuvenate your skin, but honestly, if you'd spent too much time in the sun trying to achieve that perfect alabaster complexion, which, let's be honest, was probably not happening, These treatments might have only given you temporary relief, certainly not a miracle. But Galen was no stranger to using the occasional exotic ingredient to help you look your best. There were also some very unusual concoctions that were meant to help improve skin tone and texture. Some of his treatments involved things like rosewater, honey, and even egg whites natural, if a little sticky. Imagine slathering raw egg whites on your face, letting them dry, and then peeling them off. Doesn't sound like your typical spa day, does it? And yet, this was considered a sign of high society in medieval Europe. Egg whites were considered an essential ingredient in many medieval beauty remedies. But honestly, if you're doing this before going out in public, don't be surprised if people start to give you a strange look. Let's not forget that the real beauty treatment of the time wasn't about how you felt, it was about how others perceived you. Galen's beauty standards didn't just involve physical appearance, they also emphasised things like posture and behaviour. That's right, in Galen's world, if you wanted to be seen as beautiful, you needed to conduct yourself in a way that projected nobility. Maybe you weren't a queen or a wealthy merchant, but you could at least stand up straight and speak with authority. After all, beauty was about class. It was about creating an image that made others believe you were, well, worth looking at. And let's face it, if you didn't have the proper status to back up your cosmetic treatments, you were in for a rough time. The poor well, they didn't really have the luxury of cosmetic indulgence. Their beauty routine was often just a matter of surviving the harsh conditions of medieval life. Sure, you could wash your face with the water from the local fountain, but that wasn't exactly going to give you that dewy glow we all crave. So, if you were in the lower class, Galen's critique of cosmetics probably meant a lot more to you than it would to someone sitting on a throne. Now, here's where things get really interesting, despite his gripes about cosmetics. Galen was deeply involved in medicine that had a huge impact on beauty. He didn't just prescribe beauty treatments, he invented medical practices that would be passed down for centuries. His ideas on hygiene, the balance of humours, and the nature of disease paved the way for later developments in medicine, even though we'd eventually learn that much of his advice was, let's say, a little outdated. Yet, his authority on health and beauty was so unquestioned that even centuries after his death, people were still following his prescriptions for looking good. Of course, historians still argue whether Galen was too strict in his opposition to cosmetics. Some believe he was just another curmudgeon who wanted to keep people from having fun with their appearance. Others think his focus on natural beauty and health was a necessary counterbalance to the rampant use of potentially harmful substances. Either way, his ideas about beauty, medicine, and health became intertwined in ways that would shape future generations' understanding of the body and its relationship with appearance. But let's not get too bogged down by the critique of cosmetics after all. No one can deny that medieval people were nothing if not creative in their quest for beauty. And despite the crazy and sometimes dangerous concoctions, they were driven by the same motivations that we have today, wanting to look good, wanting to feel good, and wanting to be admired. It just so happens that their journey toward achieving all that was a bit more adventurous. Remember, if you thought applying modern skincare was complicated, you're now officially a medieval beauty expert, learning from the greats like Galen himself. But don't get too comfortable yet, we're only scratching the surface of what these folks would do to achieve their look. Hang tight, because next, we're diving deeper into the strange and sometimes downright bizarre ingredients they used to create their beauty products. Alright, now that you've been officially introduced to Galen's rather charming view on beauty, it's time to roll up your sleeves metaphorically, because I'm pretty sure you didn't want to get dirty and dive into the world of medieval cosmetics. Here's the deal. If you were living in the Middle Ages and wanted to achieve that coveted look, You had to get creative. And when I say creative, I mean you'd probably need a combination of dirt, dead bugs, and the occasional animal product. What could possibly go wrong, right? Now, let's talk about ingredients. We're not talking about fancy lotions that smell like a spring meadow, or the latest beauty serum that costs more than your rent. Oh no. In the medieval world, you had to get real resourceful. So what did people use to enhance their appearance? The short answer, everything. If it could be found in nature, or, at the very least, in the local marketplace, you'd find it being used for something related to your beauty routine. And let me tell you, some of these ingredients were less than glamorous. Let's start with beeswax. Yes, that's right. Beeswax was the ingredient for many medieval beauty treatments, and I'm sure the idea of smearing it on your face sounds just delightful. But here's the thing, beeswax was a solid base for a variety of cosmetics. From lip balms to creams, it worked as a moisturiser sort of, and helped to smooth the skin, creating the illusion of a softer, younger looking face. However, the downside, well, you'd end up looking a little sticky. And not in the I'm wearing a cute lip gloss kind of way. More like that I just walked through a honeycomb and now I can't get this off kind of sticky. Still, beeswax was in high demand for both medical and cosmetic purposes. When you think about it, the Middle Ages were the original all-natural beauty industry, before anyone even knew what the term natural meant. But beeswax was just the start. Let's move on to honey, which wasn't just for sweetening tea or spreading on your morning toast. In the Middle Ages, honey was considered one of nature's most effective treatments for skincare. It was a go-to for everything from face masks to wound healing. Medieval beauty experts, if you could call them that, would mix honey with herbs, flowers, or other ingredients to create ointments and creams. If you were lucky enough to get your hands on some good quality honey, or if you could afford to buy it from an apothecary, you'd smear it on your skin in the hopes of achieving a glowing, youthful appearance. Some even believed that honey had magical properties, capable of warding off evil spirits because, of course, magic and beauty went hand in hand in the medieval world. Now, before you get too excited about slathering honey all over your face, let's talk about plant oils. Plant oils are far more sophisticated and less sticky alternative. You might be imagining rose oil or lavender essential oils, which sound like something you'd get from a fancy wellness store. But in the medieval period, people made do with what was available. That meant oils from things like olive oil, almond oil, and even walnut oil were used to moisturize the skin, keep the hair shiny, and even treat various skin conditions. Almond oil, for instance, was prized for its ability to soften and hydrate the skin, and olive oil, often used in cooking, was also used as a body and hair moisturizer. Sure, it wasn't exactly luxurious, but in a world where your options were limited, olive oil was about as good as it got. Still, even with all these natural oils, you weren't necessarily going to end up looking like a medieval model, unless, of course, you had access to the most sought-after beauty secret of all perfume. Now, perfumes were an entirely different beast. They were expensive, extravagant, and if you were part of the upper class, one of the key components to looking and smelling desirable. Perfumes were made from a variety of natural ingredients, and they had one primary function: to cover up the odour that came with a complete lack of regular bathing. That's right, medieval perfumes were not only a way to smell sweet and flowery, they were designed to mask the unpleasant smells of human sweat, animal dung, and, well, everything else that came with living in a pre-modern world. Imagine yourself walking into a banquet hall in medieval Europe, smelling like a combination of freshly baked bread, roses, and quite possibly a touch of dead fish. It wasn't exactly Chanel No. 5, but it did the job. Herbal concoctions were another popular beauty treatment You'd find everything from lavender and chamomile being mixed into oils and lotions, to more bizarre remedies like comfrey for skin rashes or sage for clearing up acne. Herbs were considered to have magical properties again, because in the medieval world, everything was a little bit magical. Lavender, for example, was believed to soothe the skin and promote relaxation, while chamomile was used to treat inflammation. But you could also expect some herbal treatments to make you smell, let's say. Interesting. Some medieval beauty enthusiasts used herbs like stinging nettle and fennel for detoxifying their skin. I wouldn't exactly call that an aromatherapy session, but hey, it was what they had. Of course, you weren't always dealing with natural, earthy ingredients like oils and flowers. Sometimes, medieval beauty treatments involved weird and wonderful substances that you'd probably never put near your skin today. And by weird, I mean things like crocodile dung. Yes, you heard that right. Crocodile dung was, apparently, a thing for ancient Egyptians and medieval folk alike. The idea behind using such unusual substances was that they could ward off evil spirits, weirdly. It seems this was a popular belief across multiple cultures in medieval Europe. There was also a belief that human urine could whiten teeth. You'd think after one try of that you'd abandon the idea, but no, apparently, it was effective. We also need to talk about the incredibly unsavoury beauty treatments involving blood, especially when it came to healing treatments for both your skin and your body. In medieval times, the idea of bloodletting was widespread. People believed that purging your body of excess blood would help balance the humours, because, apparently, everything revolved around balancing these humours. So, if you were looking to clear up acne or boost your complexion, well, someone might suggest you try a bloodletting to get your skin glowing. Don't worry though, if you survived that and were feeling especially bold, you could follow up with an oily application of balsam, basically a concoction of fragrant oils to keep you looking polished and hopefully not fainting from blood loss. And let's not forget about the incredible effort medieval folks went to just to remove unwanted hair. If you were a noblewoman or someone who could afford to look pretty, you'd be in for quite the ride. Want to remove hair from your body? Well, you had two options, either waxing or shaving. Waxing was a common practice, though what they used for wax was far from the smooth, spa-like experience we know today. Medieval waxing involved hot resin that could burn your skin off if you weren't careful. As for shaving, well, let's just say razors weren't exactly top-notch. You'd be lucky if you managed to avoid nicking yourself or slicing through skin. But, as always, beauty is pain. Right. And if that wasn't enough, there was the added fun of bleeding in the process. Some beauty treatments involve bleeding the skin again, to balance those pesky humours, all while you were sitting there with your legs awkwardly spread and hoping the outcome was worth the pain. In a way, beauty in the Middle Ages was like a sport, an extreme sport. Mind you, you had to endure discomfort, risk poisoning, and be willing to do absolutely anything to be considered beautiful. While some of us complain about expensive face creams or the occasional breakout, people in the medieval world were going through far worse just to keep up appearances. And honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to survive it. The medieval world didn't exactly believe in self-care in the way we do today. But one thing's for sure, the desire to be beautiful was a universal language, even if it meant using crocodile dung to get there. Alright, you've survived the world of beeswax, crocodile dung, and the occasional toxic face powder. But trust me, things are about to get even stranger. If you thought the previous beauty regimens were bizarre, just wait until you hear about the Trotula's recipes for wrinkle-free skin. The Trotula, written in the 12th century, was a medieval collection of medical texts that combined women's health and beauty. And let me tell you, the beauty part was more like an early prototype of modern-day beauty YouTube tutorials, if those tutorials involve some seriously questionable ingredients and instructions. Now, don't expect any spa-like indulgence here. Medieval skincare wasn't about unwinding with cucumber slices over your eyes, a face mask, or a gentle facial massage. Nope, it was about DIY beauty, with whatever you could scrounge up, often with unpleasant results. The trotula, for all its supposed wisdom, featured a range of skincare recipes that, let's just say, weren't exactly refined. Let's start with wrinkle removal, shall we? Because who doesn't want a youthful, wrinkle-free face? According to the trotula, getting rid of those pesky signs of aging wasn't a matter of indulging in soothing oils or relaxing herbal treatments. Instead, it was about grinding up plants and slathering things on your face that, quite frankly, should never have touched your skin in the first place. Among the suggested treatments, stinking iris. Yes, you heard that correctly. Stinking iris. Now, you may be thinking, stinking iris, that sounds lovely, and I'm sure it did wonders for your skin. After it burned off a few layers of it, you'd extract the juice from this wonderfully fragrant plant. And don't worry, it's not really stinking, just smelly, and then anoint your face with it twice a day. The results, supposedly, your skin would be smooth, plump and wrinkle-free. The problem, of course, was that the juice of the iris actually caused skin irritation and often resulted in peeling and burning. Oh, and did I mention the whole stinking part? You weren't exactly smelling like a garden of roses after that treatment, but the fun didn't stop there for those truly desperate to erase their wrinkles. The trotula recommended an additional step, scraping off the skin after applying the iris juice. Yes, you would literally scrape off the skin as though you were peeling off a sunburned layer. The result was supposed to reveal delicate new skin. What was left out of that advice was the fact that it could easily leave you with more than just a delicate complexion, like, say, an infection or a rash. But let's move on to something a little more pleasant: freckles. Ah, yes, the sun-kissed look. In the medieval world, those little spots on your face weren't just something to embrace, they were something to erase, for anyone unlucky enough to suffer from freckles or sunspots. The trotula had a unique remedy. Forget modern-day sunblock, vitamin C serums, or fancy exfoliating treatments. Instead, the trotula suggested a mixture of cut-up cuttlefish bones and frankincense. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, what cuttlefish bones? But that's exactly what medieval women were recommended to use in order to bleach their freckles away. They would grind up the bones, mix them with frankincense, and rub the concoction onto their skin. The goal, to lighten and fade the spots, because pale skin was, of course, a sign of nobility and wealth. Let me tell you, though, it was hardly the glowing complexion that we associate with clear skin today. The mixture left a chalky residue on the face, and didn't exactly fade the freckles as much as it left your skin irritated and puffy. But, hey, it was a work in progress. And let's not forget about wrinkle removal. Part 2. Because what is beauty in the medieval world if it isn't a multi-step? Highly uncomfortable process, after all. We can't just use one potion and be done with it. According to the trotula, another method for reducing the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles was a honey and lily root mixture. Sure, honey is pretty harmless and is still used today in many natural skincare products. But mixing it with lily root, which was often used for its astringent properties, was the medieval version of a deep detox facial. The mixture was applied directly to the face, and it was meant to tighten up the skin, removing signs of age. The problem, though, was that the astringency of the lily root could cause the skin to dry out, leaving it feeling tight, flaky, and let's face it, not at all youthful. Of course, no medieval skincare routine would be complete without the ultimate medieval face mask, a real crowd pleaser, if you were into the idea of peeling off your outer layers for the sake of beauty. The Trotula's solution, a paste made from sour wine, eggs, and mustard seeds. This paste was supposed to rejuvenate your skin, leaving it feeling fresh and new, though I'd be willing to bet you'd feel more like a walking, talking condiment than a model ready for a photo shoot. Now, here's where things get really creative. The Trotula didn't stop at just topical treatments. Oh no, they had a full body approach to beauty. According to medieval beauty practices, your complexion wasn't just about what went on your face, it was about what you ate. That's right. You could drink your way to beauty. The Trotula recommended herbal infusions for cleansing and detoxing the body from within. Ingredients like basil, oregano, and chamomile were steeped into hot water, and the resulting brew was supposed to cleanse the system, improve digestion, and, most importantly, give you that youthful glow. Now, I'm not saying herbal tea can't be a helpful part of a modern beauty routine, but drinking it as a beauty treatment alone probably wasn't going to do much more than give you a trip to the bathroom and maybe some temporary hydration. But hey, at least you weren't putting dead fish bones on your face. And here's where we go full medieval on you, if you didn't want to drink your beauty. You could always turn to bathing, but we're not talking about those luxurious self-care bubble baths we all dream of today. Medieval bathing was often a communal experience, where everyone, and I mean everyone, was in the same tub. Bathhouses were common, but they were hot, steamy, and filled with other people's sweat, sometimes. The waters were said to have healing properties, thanks to mineral content, or possibly just a good marketing campaign. But the real beauty trick came in the form of scrubbing your skin raw with a rough cloth, once your skin had been scrubbed to the point of redness. The belief was that it would promote better blood flow and healthier. Glowing skin sounds more like a medieval torture session than a beauty treatment, doesn't it? In conclusion, the Trotula's recipes for wrinkle-free skin were far from the relaxing, rejuvenating skincare routines you might see advertised today, if anything. These treatments served as an excellent reminder that beauty often came with pain and sometimes with a side of poison. While modern skincare may seem expensive or complicated, at least we don't have to deal with the medieval beauty regimen that involved putting animal products, toxic substances, and all manner of irritating concoctions on our faces. So, next time you think your beauty routine is a hassle, just be thankful that it doesn't involve scraping your skin off or bathing in sour wine, now that we've learned about some of the bizarre, dangerous, and often downright terrifying beauty treatments medieval people used in their pursuit of youth and radiance. Let's talk about pale skin, because nothing says wealth and nobility quite like a complexion that could rival a ghost's. In the Middle Ages, the ideal beauty standard wasn't about glowing, sun-kissed skin. Nope. If you had fair skin, you were considered a part of the upper class, someone who didn't need to labour out in the fields or work under the hot sun. So, how did medieval folk achieve the ultra-pale, aristocratic look? Well, they didn't have the luxury of sunscreen or SPF 100, but they had something more hazardous. Whitening the skin wasn't just about using powders to lighten your complexion, it was about becoming a literal walking canvas, free from the unsightly appearance of a farmer's tan or a sunburn. For the wealthy, pale skin symbolised their privilege and social standing. If you had a tan, it likely meant you worked outside, an absolute no-no for those who were wealthy enough to sit indoors all day. The nobility would go to great lengths to achieve and maintain that flawless light skin. And let me tell you, The methods were as extreme as they were dangerous. Lead-based makeup was a popular method of achieving that porcelain look. Yes, that's right. People would cover their faces in lead, one of the most toxic substances known to man. Lead was commonly used in powders, and the idea was that it would lighten the skin, giving you that radiant, flawless look. Think about it, they were essentially poisoning themselves to look like they belonged to the elite. But that wasn't the worst of it. The use of lead-based makeup could lead to symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and eventual skin deterioration. But did that stop anyone? Not really. Beauty was, after all, a sacrifice worth making, or so they thought. But, here's the kicker lead, wasn't the only ingredient used to whiten skin. Mercury, which was even more toxic than lead, was also a common ingredient in whitening products. Yes, the same stuff that can cause mercury poisoning when it's inhaled or ingested was used to make people paler and presumably more attractive. If you thought modern skincare had its risks, medieval cosmetics were like a high-stakes game of Russian roulette, where the only thing at risk was your health and your life. Historians still argue whether these toxic beauty treatments were widely used by all women or mostly reserved for the upper classes. But one thing is certain, if you wanted to keep your skin looking flawless in medieval times, you'd better be prepared to take some serious risks. But let's face it, no one really cared as long as they had that sweet, creamy complexion that made them look like royalty, after all. What's a little bit of poison for the sake of beauty? But let's move on from the toxic beauty potions and talk about some of the less deadly methods medieval people used to keep their skin looking fresh and pale. Some medieval women were particularly concerned with removing redness from their faces, as a ruddy complexion was often associated with hard labour or lower social standing. So, if you were a woman of noble birth, you'd want to rid yourself of any trace of the outdoors and the sun. And what better way to do that than with leeches? That's right. Medieval skincare enthusiasts had a strange affinity for bleeding. If you wanted to lighten your skin and remove any redness, you'd call on leeches to help you out. Leeches were considered to be a cure-all for just about everything, and they were believed to purify the blood and balance the body's humours because, remember, the concept of humours was everything back then. Too much blood. And you'd end up with a flushed face that wasn't considered attractive. So, women would have leeches placed around their noses and ears, where the redness was most prominent, to suck out the blood and help them achieve that perfectly pale look, if you were feeling brave. You could even get leeches put on your entire face. And if that didn't work, there was always a good old-fashioned vinegar rinse. People would rinse their faces with vinegar to remove blemishes, lighten their skin, and supposedly kill any bacteria lurking on their faces. The scent alone would probably make you want to reconsider this particular beauty treatment. But hey, it was either vinegar or risk the wrath of a society that demanded perfection, so people poured it on. You can't say they weren't dedicated. Next, let's talk about the absurd lengths people went to in order to maintain a flawless appearance. And no, I'm not just talking about the ladies here. Men, too, were deeply invested in maintaining their youthful looks and avoiding the telltale signs of age. You've already heard about the dangers of hair treatments and the lengths to which people would go to avoid baldness. But it wasn't just about looking younger, it was about looking virile, strong, and most importantly, worthy of social status. Men of noble birth would often have their hair dyed to cover up any grey. Imagine trying to maintain a dignified appearance while covering up those silver streaks, all while risking your health with some seriously questionable dyes. Men would use saffron, yep, the spice to brighten their hair colour. The idea was that it would give them that golden-haired, sun-kissed look that suggested they were youthful, energetic, and absolutely untouchable. Of course, This meant they'd be rubbing saffron all over their scalps, perhaps a little too much saffron, leading to some rather strange side effects. In fact, overusing saffron sometimes led to skin irritation and allergic reactions. But hey, who needs caution when you can look like a Greco-Roman god? While you might have had to scrape your skin raw and endure leech therapy, at least you could count on a proper deodorant to keep you from stinking up the room. Or, well, that's what the medieval world thought. Deodorants, as we know them, didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Instead, people relied on perfumes, and not the soft floral kind you'd wear on a date night. Oh no. The perfumes of medieval times were heavy sometimes, filled with musk, animal fats, and spices. The goal was to mask the unbearable scent of sweat, animals, and the general grime that permeated daily life. The medieval nobility weren't showering daily, after all. So, they needed something strong to create a pleasant, and let's be real, less offensive fragrance, to ensure you didn't reek. You could dab some rose water or myrrh oil on your body, or even sprinkle powdered frankincense on your clothes. But you didn't have to be wealthy to indulge in these perfumes. The poor used whatever they could find, usually herbs or flowers to mask the smells. If you were lucky, you could collect lavender, rosemary, or thyme and carry it around in your pocket as a sort of scented sachet. If you weren't so lucky, you'd be walking around smelling like whatever everyone else was smelling like, unwashed, underprivileged, and in need of a good bath. It was a struggle, no doubt. The bottom line, the medieval world didn't just have a different definition of beauty, they had a completely different approach to what was necessary to achieve that beauty. Whether you were smearing pig fat on your face, bleaching your skin with lead, or relying on leeches to achieve the perfect complexion, the lengths medieval people went to just to look good were nothing short of extreme. And the craziest part, many of these treatments weren't just about vanity, they were about survival. Beauty, in the medieval world, was a status symbol. It was the line between life and death, rich and poor, noble and peasant. And while modern beauty routines are a far cry from what medieval folk had to endure, one thing is clear: the pursuit of beauty is as old as time. Let's talk about something that we're all probably a little bit obsessed with: body hair. But I'm not just talking about the occasional upper lip fuzz or the dreaded leg hair situation. No, we're diving into how medieval women dealt with body hair. Ever wondered what lengths they went to? Well, let me tell you, it wasn't as simple as grabbing your favourite razor or waxing kit. Oh no. No, what they had was a seriously strange mix of toxic chemicals, painful waxing, and all-around bizarre beauty rituals that we today would probably raise an eyebrow or maybe even a whole eyebrow arch at. Buckle up, because medieval hair removal was nothing like the gentle, smooth experience we know today. In the medieval period, body hair was seen as problematic, especially for women. Having visible body hair in places like the arms, legs, and heaven forbid, the face was simply unacceptable. And if you were a woman of high status, you were expected to be as smooth as a marble statue. Having hairless skin wasn't just a beauty trend, it was a social and cultural marker. After all, pale, smooth skin was a sign that you didn't have to work outdoors and that you were of noble or high birth. Working women, especially peasants, were stuck with a bit of body hair, but the ladies of the court, well, they didn't have that luxury. They had to keep it all in check, and that meant some seriously strange methods of getting rid of it. Now, let's start with waxing because, let's be honest, waxing has been the preferred method of hair removal for centuries. It's brutal, it's painful, and it's as effective as it is uncomfortable. In the Middle Ages, women who wanted smooth, hairless skin often used hot resin or tree sap to rip their hair out. Imagine slathering your legs in something sticky and hot, then letting it cool, only to rip it all off hair and all in one go. But here's the kicker, the process wasn't done in the comfort of a well-lit, temperature-controlled room with soothing music in the background. Oh no, you had to do this in a dark, candle-lit room while your maid, or in some cases, your husband, yanked the sticky stuff off. Now that sounds delightful, doesn't it? Not to mention the aftercare. Oh yes, the burning and redness that came afterward. But hey, at least you were smooth. And if you weren't into the idea of sticky sap being ripped off your skin, who would be? There were always tweezers. These tiny little tools were used to pluck away unwanted hair, especially around the eyebrows and upper lip. Medieval tweezers. However, were a little more rustic than what we're used to today. These weren't the smooth, ergonomic tweezers that make it feel like you're gently removing hair. No. These tweezers were often made from metal or bone, and they were far more effective at pulling out your soul than they were at removing hair. But the real medieval magic came from the combination of tweezing, waxing, and chemicals. Yep, that's right, toxic chemicals. If you were a highborn lady, or even a lady in waiting, you might have the means to get your hands on some seriously powerful hair removal concoctions. Lye was a popular ingredient. Yes, lye, the same thing used to make soap back in the day, but this wasn't the lovely, creamy soap you might imagine. This was potassium hydroxide, and it was used as a chemical solution to burn away the hair. Imagine smearing lye on your skin, hoping it would kill the hair, and dealing with the aftermath. It was effective, sure, but it came with some seriously painful consequences. Historians still argue whether lye was used on skin directly, but evidence suggests that it was at least a part of some medieval hair removal treatments, especially for those who could afford the luxury of it. If you used lye, you'd probably end up with some red, irritated skin, or even worse, a nice chemical burn that would leave scars for days. But beauty was pain, wasn't it? Now, let's get to something even stranger, removing hair from more sensitive areas. I'm talking about, yes, the bikini line. Medieval women went to extreme lengths to achieve a perfectly hair-free body, and some even took to using animal fat mixtures on their pubic hair. These fat-based creams were designed to loosen the hair follicles, making it easier to remove the hair. Sounds fun. Right, just imagine coating yourself in animal fat and hoping for the best. And here's a little extra medieval quirk for you if you couldn't get your hands on animal fat or lye. Potash, a kind of alkaline solution made from plant ashes, was often used as a base for hair removal. Yes, plant ashes. You'd mix this with other things like olive oil or herbs and create a greasy, sticky mixture that you'd rub into the skin. It was meant to dissolve the hair, though it more likely just caused some irritation, redness and irritation. But medieval beauty secrets weren't just about hair removal. Shaving was actually an option too, though it wasn't quite as straightforward as the modern straight razor. Shaving tools were often knives or razor blades, made from bone, copper or other metals. These tools weren't designed for smooth, painless shaving, and the idea of a close shave was pretty much non-existent. Imagine taking a rusty blade to your skin and hoping you didn't nick yourself. Yep. That was shaving in the Middle Ages. It was risky, it was brutal, and it certainly wasn't the relaxing, luxurious experience that we associate with a good shave today. But it wasn't just women who cared about body hair. Men, especially those in higher social classes, also spent considerable time grooming and shaving. And let me tell you, if you were a medieval man with a beard, it wasn't as easy as simply growing it and calling it a day. You had to care for it and remove hair in specific places to achieve that ideal look. The beard was often considered a symbol of masculinity and strength, but keeping it in tip-top shape required effort. There were even special tools designed to help you maintain that perfect beard, such as beard combs and scissors. But here's the twist: shaving could also be seen as emasculating by some in the medieval world. If you shaved off your beard, people might wonder what was wrong with you. It wasn't just a style choice. It was a matter of manhood and status. After all, a clean-shaven face meant you weren't hard-working or manly enough to grow out that powerful beard. Right, if you had the luxury of being clean-shaven, it likely meant you were in a higher position, where you didn't have to get your hands dirty. So, what did all this medieval hair removal madness say about society? For one, it shows just how far people went to maintain their status through beauty standards, whether it was the poor scraping by with makeshift tools or the elite using lye and animal fat concoctions. It was clear that looking good meant doing whatever it took to get there, even if it meant exposing your skin to the dangers of toxins or extreme discomfort. At the end of the day, beauty standards in the Middle Ages were less about personal preference and more about social positioning. If you could afford the best beauty products, you were set. If you couldn't, well, you had to get creative. And getting creative often meant subjecting yourself to some of the weirdest, most uncomfortable treatments imaginable, whether it was waxing, shaving, or using toxic chemicals to get rid of unwanted hair. People in medieval times were willing to go to extremes for the sake of beauty. So, next time you're sitting down to wax your legs or complain about a pesky hair removal treatment, just remember the medieval beauty regimen was not a walk in the park. They were slathering themselves with animal fat and scraping their skin off, all in the name of looking flawless. If they could survive that, you've got this. Welcome back, my friend. By now, you've braved the weird world of medieval beauty routines, from the toxic potions to the public bathhouses, and even the terrifying ordeal of hair removal. But just when you think you've heard it all, there's one last part of the medieval beauty regimen that truly takes the cake. I'm talking about skincare, the kind that involves natural ingredients, questionable remedies, and some pretty strange ideas about what makes a complexion flawless. Think you've learned all the medieval beauty secrets? You're about to be surprised. Ready? Let's dive into the rituals of smooth, blemish-free skin, medieval style. Now, we all know that skincare today is a multi-billion-dollar industry. People are all about their creams, serums, and lotions, all designed to make us glow like we're fresh out of a magazine ad. But in the medieval world, things weren't so easy. Forget about your fancy skincare routine and Instagram ads for miracle masks. Medieval women were using whatever they had on hand, which often meant raw animal products and herbal concoctions that could make today's beauty bloggers squirm. If you wanted that smooth, glowing skin, you had to earn it through hard work, strange potions, and a lot of patience. So, what did medieval women use to achieve the ultimate skin goals? Let's start with honey, one of the oldest and most beloved skincare ingredients in history. Medieval beauty experts knew that honey was a powerful ingredient. It was antibacterial, hydrating, and most importantly, cheap. Honey was often used as the base for facial masks and cleansers, and many believed that it could treat acne, remove wrinkles, and even brighten the complexion. The great thing about honey is that it works. It nourishes the skin, locks in moisture, and leaves you with a soft, dewy finish. The problem, well, using raw honey meant your face was covered in stickiness, and it wasn't exactly the most luxurious experience. But hey, for medieval women, that was the price of beauty. But honey wasn't the only thing medieval women were smearing on their faces in the name of beauty. They were also slathering on rosewater, milk, and even egg whites. Now if you're thinking, wait, didn't people drink milk back then? Why would they waste it on their faces? The answer is simple. Medieval beauty standards demanded it. Milk, as we know, contains lactic acid, which helps exfoliate dead skin cells and reveal a smoother complexion. Egg whites were used as a tightener for the skin. Think of them as a medieval version of your modern-day facelift cream. The only downside was that it left your skin feeling tight and dry afterward. Not exactly the luxurious spa experience you'd hope for after all that effort. And let's not forget rose water. Rose water was a common ingredient used for everything from making fragrances to treating skin irritation. It was a favoured product, especially among those wealthy enough to afford it. Rose water was thought to cool and soothe the skin, and many believed it had anti-aging properties. It's no wonder that it was used in countless medieval beauty recipes, often combined with other natural ingredients like aloe vera, saffron, and even wine. People were drinking it, bathing in it, and smearing it all over their faces, and hey, if you could afford it, why not indulge? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Rose water wasn't the only magical potion medieval women had in their beauty arsenal. Speaking of magical potions, the medieval world also had its fair share of strange beauty remedies involving herbs, plants, and minerals. These were the kind of beauty treatments that would leave modern dermatologists scratching their heads. Lavender, thyme, basil, and even rosemary were popular in medieval skincare. These herbs were often steeped in water to make herbal infusions, which were then used to treat everything from blemishes to dry skin to puffy eyes. Rosemary, in particular, was believed to stimulate circulation, which medieval women thought would give their skin a healthy, radiant glow. But here's where things get a little more interesting. Medieval skincare often involves smelly ingredients. Sulphur, which is known today for its acne-fighting properties, was used in the Middle Ages as a way to combat blemishes and pimples. But don't get too excited. While sulphur may sound like a modern miracle ingredient, back then it didn't come in cute little jars and airtight packaging. Instead, it was often mixed with fats or herbal concoctions, and you'd have to endure the smell of rotten eggs while hoping for clearer skin. The idea was that sulphur would purify the skin, though it probably did more harm than good in the long run. And if sulphur wasn't your thing, there was always ground pumice stone. Yes, that's right, pumice. You'd use it to scrub away dead skin and exfoliate. But let's be real, scrubbing your face with a rock probably didn't leave you feeling like a glowing goddess. Now, we've all heard of face masks. They're a staple in modern skincare routines. But medieval women didn't have the luxury of popping into Sephora and buying a cucumber mint infused sheet mask. No, they had to get creative. The trotula, that legendary 12th century medieval medical text, offered a variety of skin masks that involved some truly bizarre ingredients. Some of these masks were made from plants, herbs, milk, and even vinegar. Some women would create cleansing creams from melted butter and herbal oils, while others would rub their faces with clay or charcoal to draw out impurities. One particularly strange mask involved stinking iris, the same plant we talked about earlier in section 4, which was said to help tighten and refresh the skin. The idea was that it would brighten and smooth the face, making it appear more youthful. The problem, however, was that stinking iris wasn't exactly the kind of plant you wanted to leave on your skin for too long. It could cause irritation, inflammation, and, if not properly handled, even chemical burns. But for some reason, it was still seen as a great beauty secret, one that would make your skin smoother, whiter, and more even in tone, because, of course, that was the ultimate goal in the medieval world, pale. Flawless skin. Now, the medieval beauty routine wasn't just about smooth skin or glowing faces, it was about preserving that youthful look for as long as possible. Anti-aging was a big deal in the Middle Ages, but not in the way we think of it today. Today, we look at anti-aging products as a way to prevent wrinkles and fine lines. Back then, The focus was on keeping the skin tight and firm, and there were a number of methods used to try to achieve that. Women would use tightening creams made from everything from egg whites to vinegar and clay. One popular remedy involved milk baths, where women would soak their faces in lactic acid to slough off dead skin cells, making their skin feel tighter and more refreshed. But here's the catch: these milk baths were often just as skin drying as they were hydrating. The results were often a mix of smooth but dry skin, with women scrubbing their faces with abrasive ingredients to get rid of blemishes and imperfections. If you've been listening closely, you'll notice that all these medieval beauty remedies have something in common: they're time-consuming, painful, and often dangerous. Whether it was using animal fat to remove hair, applying lead-based powders to whiten skin, or soaking in sulphur and pumice to exfoliate. These beauty routines weren't about pampering themselves, they were about surviving the social pressure to look good and stay in the game. Medieval beauty wasn't just about looking good, it was about maintaining a status quo where perfection, or at least the illusion of it, could make or break your social standing. So, the next time you're faced with a fancy skincare product that promises to make your skin glow, just remember you're lucky. You don't have to sit around waiting for your face to peel off from a lead-based powder or burn from sulphur. The medieval quest for beauty was full of trial, error, and unfortunately a lot of suffering. But at least we can agree on one thing. Modern beauty products are definitely a lot less toxic than the stuff they used in the past. So far, we've explored the wild, bizarre, and often dangerous ways medieval people went about maintaining their beauty, from toxic face powders to strange hair removal techniques. It's clear that achieving the perfect look in the Middle Ages wasn't for the faint of heart. But just when you thought we'd covered all the bases, let's move on to the topic of hair. Because, believe it or not, getting luscious locks in medieval times required an astonishing amount of effort. If you thought your hair care routine was complicated, you're about to learn just how far medieval folks would go to make sure their mane stayed shiny, fresh, and, most importantly, fashionable. When it came to hair, the ideal didn't stop at just length or style. It was all about achieving the perfect colour, the perfect texture, and the perfect shine. And for the wealthiest in medieval society, if you weren't blessed with voluminous hair naturally, there were ways to fake it. Enter the world of medieval wigs, hair dyes, and all sorts of concoctions that people used to transform their hair from dull to dazzling. Hair, after all, wasn't just a physical feature, it was a status symbol. If you had beautiful hair, it signalled that you were either wealthy enough to not have to work in the fields, or someone who was well connected to those who could afford the luxury of beauty treatments. But before we dive into wigs and dyes, let's talk about the medieval obsession with hair. Back then, hair wasn't just something to brush and forget about. It was seen as a personal adornment, and both men and women worked hard to keep it looking just right. And if your natural hair wasn't cutting it, there was no shame in making it better sometimes, through drastic means. Medieval people believed that beautiful hair was a sign of health, virility, and femininity, so you could imagine how far people were willing to go to enhance what they had. Let's start with the hair dyeing process, because medieval times weren't about embracing your natural shade, they were about enhancing it. As we've seen with many beauty trends in the Middle Ages, they loved bold and striking beauty choices, and that included hair colour. The idea was simple if you were rich enough. You could afford to manipulate your natural colour to reflect your wealth, health, and sometimes even your morality. Blonde hair was one of the most sought after colours. Why? Well, it was often associated with purity, youth, and noble status. In a time when pale skin was already a symbol of the aristocracy, platinum blonde hair took things to the next level. But how did they achieve this light, vibrant hair colour none? They didn't pop into a salon for some highlights. Instead, medieval women would use a concoction of lye, plant oils, and herbal mixtures to bleach their hair. They'd slather their hair with these potent brews and then sit in the sun, allowing the rays to help the process along. The result, blonde locks, but with a hefty price tag on your scalp's health. You could end up with dry, brittle hair. But at least you were in line with beauty standards. It was a trade-off people were willing to take for the sake of beauty, even if it meant dealing with the consequences later. If blonde wasn't your thing, or if you had darker hair and wanted to lighten it, honey and chamomile were also popular options. They were less harsh than lye, though still not the kind of thing you'd use if you didn't want to smell like a walking flower pot. Honey, with its natural lightening properties, was mixed with herbs to create a more gentle, albeit slower, hair lightener. The result was a sun-kissed look that was much more manageable than the bleach and sun combo. But again, you were still left with hair that was less shiny and more sticky than anything else. For those who weren't interested in lightening their hair, but instead wanted it to look richer and darker, there were concoctions that could help achieve the brunette look. Walnut husks, coffee, and even henna were all used to create darker shades. Women would steep walnut husks in hot water and use the resulting dark liquid to dye their hair a deep, rich brown. This would give their hair a darker tone, which, to them, signified maturity and mystery, two qualities that were highly prized in the medieval world. Of course, henna was a much more common method for darker shades, and also carried the added bonus of being permanent, as in, it wouldn't easily wash out after one bath. Think of henna as the medieval version of today's semi-permanent hair dyes. But what if you didn't want to deal with dyeing your hair at all? Maybe you were born with dull, lifeless locks and couldn't afford to put yourself through hours of chemical concoctions. Well, you could always fake it with a wig. Wigs were all the rage in medieval Europe, particularly among the wealthy elite. Why? You ask. Well, a wig was a perfect way to show off your social status while hiding any imperfections in your hair. The wealthier you were, the more extravagant your wig was likely to be. Some of the best wigs were made from real human hair, but in some cases, horsehair was also used, because why not add some equine flair to your head? These wigs could be styled into elaborate, towering shapes that screamed, "I have money, and I'm here to make a statement." While wigs in the modern world are often reserved for theatre or a bad hair day, in medieval times, they were a serious fashion statement. But here's the kicker: wigs weren't always about enhancing what you had. In many cases, they were used to cover up hair loss in a time where appearance was everything. A balding head was something you'd want to avoid at all costs. Wigs were a quick fix for this dilemma, but if you didn't have a fancy wig to hide your thinning locks, there were other remedies. Some people turned to potions made from horse dung, milk, and herbs. Yep, you heard that right. These miracle treatments were supposed to help regrow hair or prevent further loss. But what was even more alarming was the practice of hair transplants, not the kind of surgical transplant you might think of today, but the primitive method where people would essentially sew patches of hair from one part of the scalp to another. Sounds painful. Right, that's because it was. The concept of hair restoration was as brutal as it was ineffective. While we're on the subject of wigs and hair pieces, let's not forget the most fashionable accessory of the medieval elite hairnets. Yes, those pretty little decorative pieces that kept your hair from flying all over the place. But don't be fooled into thinking these were simply practical items. No, they were as much about status as they were about function. The wealthier women adorned their heads with golden nets, pearl-studded netting, and sometimes even precious gems woven into the design. These nets weren't just about keeping your hair in place, they were a symbol of wealth. and if you were a lady with access to the finest hairnets, it signified you had the means to maintain a luxurious lifestyle. Not bad for a piece of fabric, huh? So, what does all this tell us about medieval beauty standards? Well, clearly, hair was serious business. Whether you were spending hours bleaching your locks with lye or investing in a wig to cover up a balding scalp. One thing was clear, your hair defined who you were. For the wealthy, hair was more than just something you brushed and styled. It was an accessory, a status symbol, and sometimes even a point of pride. But don't think the lower classes were left out of the conversation. They too were experimenting with herbs, dyes, and wigs in an attempt to achieve the perfect, aristocratic look, even if they had to get a little creative in their approach. At the end of the day, though, hair in the Middle Ages wasn't just about looking good, it was about survival, it was about fitting in, rising to the top and faking it until you made it. And if that meant slathering your scalp with horse dung, or wearing a wig made from someone else's hair, so be it. Luscious locks weren't just a sign of beauty, they were the symbol of power in a world where appearance mattered more than anything. Now, let's talk about something we all deal with on a daily basis, bad breath. It's one of those things we never really want to think about, but we all know it's there, lurking after coffee or a particularly garlicky lunch. But in medieval times, bad breath wasn't just a little social faux pas, it was a serious battle. And, surprisingly, medieval people weren't entirely oblivious to the issue. They just had their own, shall we say, interesting methods of keeping their breath fresh. While oral hygiene was, shall we say, lacking compared to today's standards, that didn't stop people from coming up with some truly bizarre and often ineffective ways to combat that dreaded dragon's breath. So, what did people do back in the Middle Ages to fight bad breath? Well, first of all, let's get one thing straight. Brushing teeth the way we know it today wasn't even on the radar. Forget about toothpaste and electric toothbrushes, in fact. People back then didn't even know about plaque or the need to floss. If you were lucky, you'd have a simple wooden toothbrush, maybe with some rough bristles, or even a stick from a tree. But brushing teeth regularly, not so much. The general rule of thumb was more about occasional cleaning rather than constant maintenance. And it's safe to say that people's teeth were probably in pretty rough shape as a result. Now, here's where it gets a little more fascinating to combat the stench of bad breath. Medieval folks relied on the age-old trick of herbs and spices. For the wealthier folk, herbs like mint, cloves, rosemary, and cardamom were often chewed to mask bad breath. And honestly, this seems pretty reasonable. Right, just pop a mint or clove in your mouth, and boom, fresh breath. But hold up, this wasn't just about freshening the air around your mouth. These herbs and spices were used for flavour, but they were also believed to have magical properties that could purify the body. That's right. You were basically detoxing your body by chewing on herbs, or so they thought. But the real kicker mint and cloves weren't just for fresh breath. They were often included in elaborate mouthwash recipes. Forget the pretty little mouthwashes of today, with minty fresh scents and fancy labels. Medieval mouthwash was fierce. We're talking concoctions made from vinegar, wine, spices, and sometimes even garlic. Yes, garlic. While garlic may do wonders for cooking, its breath-freshening powers in the medieval world were questionable, to say the least. You'd rinse with something like vinegar and garlic, probably to try and cleanse your body of some perceived bad humours, and then follow it up with a nice serving of rosewater or alcoholic beverages to mask the taste. This is the part where good intentions really clashed with execution. Because after all, you may have freshened up your breath for the moment, but you probably still smelled a lot like garlic and wine. But that's not all. If you didn't have access to herbs or expensive ingredients, like rosewater, You could always turn to foul-smelling substances that were considered healthy for the time. Urine, for example, was thought to have cleansing properties, and some medieval people believed that gargling urine could help freshen breath. Yes, you read that correctly. Gargling urine, if this idea is giving you chills. You're not alone. The thought of using urine as a mouthwash today sounds absolutely repulsive. But back then, it was considered a legitimate treatment. In fact, people believed that urine could help get rid of bad breath and even treat dental issues like toothaches. It's a good thing we have modern science, because I can't imagine how many people walked around with an unpleasant aftertaste of urine in their mouths back then. But let's not be too harsh after all. The medieval people didn't have the luxury of modern dental care. The fact that they tried to combat bad breath using herbs, spices, and even urine shows just how important oral hygiene was to them. Even though their methods might seem a bit strange to us today, still, there were some really clever solutions. One common remedy for bad breath involved chewing on a mixture of sage and thyme, two herbs that were thought to cleanse the mouth and neutralise odours. In fact, these herbs were commonly used in medicinal recipes to treat various ailments. Including bad breath, there were also pouches of herbs that could be kept in the pocket or around the neck, and these would help to freshen breath throughout the day. These small pouches were like medieval mints, though I'm guessing the scent wasn't quite as pleasant as a modern mint. But wait if you thought we were done with the medieval weirdness when it comes to bad breath. Hold on to your hat, because we haven't even touched on toothpaste yet. Now, toothpaste as we know it didn't exist, but medieval people still had some pretty creative alternatives. Some people made a kind of paste using charcoal, salt, and herbs. This mixture was meant to scrub the teeth, removing food particles and bad breath-causing debris. Charcoal, believe it or not, was often used in these pastes because of its natural abrasive properties. It was believed to help clean teeth by scrubbing away plaque, and it worked, kind of. The downside charcoal is quite harsh, and while it may have helped with the cleaning process, it didn't exactly leave you with that minty fresh sensation we've come to expect from today's toothpastes. It was more about scraping away the bad stuff, rather than actually leaving your mouth feeling refreshed. Historians still argue about how effective medieval oral hygiene actually was, but we know one thing for sure. Bad breath was not a trivial matter in the Middle Ages. In fact, it was considered a serious issue, whether it was because of the social implications after all. A noble person had to look good and smell good, or because of the belief that bad breath was a sign of physical imbalance. People tried their best to fight the odour, they just didn't always have the tools we do now. They didn't have dentists, fluoride toothpaste, or even the concept of brushing regularly. What they did have were herbs, spices, and some truly bizarre and often gross methods of keeping their mouths clean. By the time you get to the end of this, you might find yourself feeling grateful for our modern dental care. Imagine having to gargle urine, scrub your teeth with charcoal, and then pray your bad breath would somehow magically disappear. Luckily for us. We've come a long way since the Middle Ages, but in some weird way, it's kind of fascinating to see how far people were willing to go to freshen their breath. So, next time you're sipping on your minty mouthwash or brushing with that fancy whitening toothpaste, just remember that there was a time when people would try anything, even urine, to get their breath smelling fresh. Bad breath in the Middle Ages. Let's just say it was a whole different ball game. We've already delved into the bizarre beauty practices of the Middle Ages, from toxic face powders to strange hair dyes. But now, let's tackle something that, in our modern age of teeth whitening toothpaste and laser teeth whitening, seems almost laughably primitive teeth whitening. You may have thought medieval people were mostly concerned with battling lice or removing wrinkles, but trust me, they were obsessed with their teeth. 2. And while they didn't have access to the fancy whitening strips or high-tech treatments we enjoy today, they still found creative ways to get those pearly whites. But here's the kicker: their go-to method for achieving a white smile was none other than soot. Yes, you read that correctly. Soot. Imagine brushing your teeth with it. Doesn't sound all that glamorous, does it? In today's world, teeth whitening is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We've got electric toothbrushes, whitening toothpaste, charcoal powders, and even laser treatments that promise a bright, dazzling smile in a matter of minutes. But medieval teeth whitening wasn't quite so high-tech. Back then, the tools available for oral hygiene were basic, to say the least. Forget about fluoride and whitening agents. Medieval folks had to rely on whatever they could get their hands on, even if it meant scrubbing their teeth with soot or ashes. The most common method for whitening teeth was to use a mixture of soot and water. Yes, soot the black, powdery residue left after burning wood or coal. It may sound strange to us today, but soot was a major part of medieval life. It was abundant, and medieval people had a lot of it lying around. Soot was often used in fireplaces, hearths, and cooking fires, and it was easily accessible to just about everyone to make a paste. People would take a bit of soot, mix it with water sometimes, even adding a bit of salt, and use it to scrub their teeth. The idea was that the abrasiveness of the soot would help scrape away dirt, plaque, and other build-up, leaving their teeth cleaner and, ideally, a little whiter. But did it actually work? Historians still debate whether soot had any real whitening effects. On one hand, the abrasive nature of soot certainly scraped away food particles and plaque, but on the other hand, using soot as a cleaning agent could easily have damaged the enamel of the teeth. While it might have made teeth appear slightly cleaner in the short term, it probably didn't do much for long-term oral health. In fact, over time, using soot could very well have led to enamel erosion, which would make teeth appear duller and more prone to decay. So while medieval people may have had cleaner teeth, it wasn't exactly a recipe for a long-lasting, radiant smile. Interestingly, soot wasn't the only method for teeth whitening in the medieval world. People also used ashes from burned wood or bones as a tooth cleaning agent. The ash was often mixed with other substances, such as herbs or salt, to create a rudimentary toothpaste. This abrasive mixture would help to scrub the teeth and remove surface stains, but like soot, it likely didn't do much for whitening or oral health beyond that. Some people also used charcoal as a whitening agent, believing that the dark powder could help detoxify and purify the mouth. Charcoal might have been better than soot in terms of abrasiveness, but it still didn't provide the benefits of modern oral hygiene practices. But why soot? Why not something sweeter smelling, like mint or lavender? The answer lies in the medieval mindset, practicality over luxury. Back then, people didn't have the fancy gadgets or personal care products we take for granted today. Soot was an easily available, everyday substance if you were lucky enough to live in a household with a fireplace or hearth. You were bound to have soot on hand. Why not make use of it? Of course, this method wasn't just about whitening, it was also about keeping your teeth clean and functional. After all, people in the Middle Ages had to work with what they had, and if soot was the best option available for cleaning teeth, so be it. But the obsession with whiter teeth didn't stop at soot and ashes. Medieval people were incredibly creative in their pursuit of a perfect smile, even if their methods were somewhat extreme. For example, some medieval people used vinegar as a mouth rinse to try to whiten their teeth. This method, while effective at cleaning and potentially killing bacteria, wasn't exactly the best option for long-term oral health. Vinegar, being highly acidic, could wear away at the enamel on teeth, making them more susceptible to decay over time. But for medieval folk, the idea of whitening or brightening the teeth was a worthwhile trade-off, even if it meant dealing with a little acidic damage to their precious enamel. But even the most dedicated medieval folk weren't always successful in their teeth whitening efforts. In fact, bad teeth were pretty common back then. While some people may have been able to maintain relatively healthy teeth, it's safe to say that most people had decayed, rotten teeth by the time they reached adulthood. This wasn't just because of their lack of proper oral care, it was also due to the fact that medieval diets were often high in sugar, think honey, fruit, and sweetmeats. And medieval people didn't have the oral care tools necessary to protect their teeth from cavities and decay. So, while they may have gone to great lengths to whiten their teeth with soot, charcoal, and ashes, many were still left with teeth that were, frankly, a little less than pearly white. What's even more fascinating is that some medieval texts suggest that teeth whitening was actually symbolic. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking wealthy. The idea was that those who could afford the luxury of teeth whitening through the use of soot, charcoal, and other methods were likely the elite. Having white teeth signalled that you were not involved in the dirty, sweaty labour of working the fields or doing manual labour. Instead, you were part of the upper class, someone who could afford to focus on aesthetics and maintain a clean, polished appearance. So, while soot and ashes may not have been the best tools for achieving a healthy smile, they were certainly the tools that marked social status. When you compare medieval teeth whitening to what we have today, it's easy to see just how far we've come in terms of oral hygiene today. We have dentists, whitening strips, and even laser teeth whitening. We also have access to products that actually improve the health of our teeth, rather than just covering up the issues. But in the Middle Ages, people had to make do with what was available, and while it might sound absurd to think of scrubbing your teeth with soot, it's a testament to the ingenuity of the time. People wanted to look their best, and they were willing to use whatever methods they had at their disposal, no matter how strange or potentially harmful. So, next time you're using your whitening toothpaste, just remember that you're in good company. Sure, you're not using soot or ashes to brighten your smile, but back in the Middle Ages, people were doing everything they could to polish their pearly whites, even if it meant risking a little enamel damage in the process. Medieval beauty was about much more than just looking good. It was about survival, status, and doing whatever you could to make sure you stayed on top of the social ladder. And even though their methods may seem archaic and strange to us today, medieval people were always striving for that one thing. We all want a perfect smile. Alright, let's face it, body odour is something none of us can escape. Whether you're fresh out of the shower or coming home from a full day of work, everyone's got to deal with it. But body odour in the Middle Ages, oh boy. If you thought your deodorant routine was a bit of a hassle, just wait until you hear how medieval people managed their stinky situations. Spoiler alert, it's definitely not pretty. Now, in the modern world, we have all sorts of ways to keep ourselves smelling fresh. Antiperspirants, deodorants, and perfume lotions are our best friends in the battle against body odour. But back in medieval times, the whole concept of deodorizing was pretty, well, rudimentary, to say the least. There wasn't exactly a Dove stick or a bottle of Old Spice on the shelf for anyone to grab. In fact, deodorants, modern or medieval, weren't even really a thing. So how did medieval folk deal with the inevitable sweat, smell, and general funk that comes from living in a world where bathing wasn't regular and personal hygiene wasn't exactly top of the to-do list? Let's start by getting the basic context. Bathing in medieval Europe wasn't something you did every day or week. For that matter, in fact, it wasn't uncommon for people to go weeks or even months without a proper bath. Yes, bathing was considered essential by some, but it wasn't as widespread as we think today. Public bathhouses were available, in some cities, especially in larger medieval towns and urban centres. But even then, the practice was limited. Plus, after the Black Plague, many of these bathhouses were closed down, partly out of fear that public bathing could spread disease. So, personal hygiene. Yeah, it wasn't something you just casually tended to every day. Now, with that said, the medieval mindset was that body odour, whether it was from sweat, dirt, or even stinky feet, was a natural part of life. But there was still a need to do something about it. So, what did they do? You may be surprised to know that medieval folks did try a few interesting ways to mask or manage the situation. But unfortunately, these methods weren't exactly up to par with today's standards. One of the most common practices for tackling body odour was the use of herbs and flowers. If you were a wealthy medieval person and wanted to smell like royalty, chances are you used a herbal sachet. These little bundles of herbs and flowers were sewn into bags and worn under your clothing, particularly around your neck or armpits, where body odour was likely to be most intense. These herbal sachets were meant to cover up the scent of sweat with pleasant fragrances. Lavender, rose petals, and cloves were common choices, as were thyme and mint. But here's the catch: while these little herbal bundles may have smelled wonderful at first, they didn't exactly do anything to stop the sweat or deal with the root cause of the odour. These sachets simply masked the smell. And if you think about it, that's not much different from today's quick fix perfumes that try to cover up the scent of body odour. So, medieval people were essentially relying on perfumes, but without the benefit of modern deodorants that also stop sweat, if anything. It was a temporary solution that really didn't solve the problem. Now, for the common folk, herbal sachets were often out of reach, and if they had them, they weren't exactly something they could easily replace. So, what were they left with? Well, you guessed it, sweat. Body odour became a regular part of daily life, and much like today, people just had to deal with it. They'd work in the fields, tend to animals, or labour in the kitchens, and by the end of the day, they were sweaty. But oddly enough, there was a mindset in medieval times that body odour wasn't as embarrassing as it is now. People in the lower classes didn't have the luxury of hiding their scent, so they just went on about their business. But wait, didn't medieval people use deodorants? Well, yes, sort of. Let's move to some of the more innovative and odd solutions they tried. Alum, for example, was a common mineral used in medieval times. Alum was a mineral salt that was often used as a natural antiseptic or astringent. It was believed that alum could help reduce sweating and control body odour. Some people would rub it on their armpits or feet to try and stop the stink. The problem: alum was pretty harsh on the skin and didn't work as effectively as the deodorants we have today, but it did have some antibacterial properties. So in some cases, it could temporarily reduce the amount of bacteria on the skin, the real culprit behind body odour. But alum wasn't the only strange deodorant alternative medieval people tried. Vinegar, which was commonly used for everything from cleaning to preserving food, was sometimes used to douse the body to neutralise odours. Some people would use a vinegar solution as a type of wash, especially for armpits. However, while vinegar was great for cleaning wounds and killing bacteria, it wasn't really effective for long-lasting odour control. After all, you can't exactly walk around smelling like a salad all day, can you? If none of that worked for you, then there was always the good old-fashioned smell of sweat to get you through. Many medieval people would turn to heavy clothing as an additional method for hiding body odour. Cloaks, woolen tunics, and furs were worn to trap the smell inside. Now, we all know wool can be a bit thick and itchy, but back then, it had the added benefit of hiding unpleasant smells by absorbing sweat and keeping it under wraps, literally. The wealthy had access to the finest furs, which helped in dulling the odour of their body for the lower classes. Though, wool was probably the best bet for covering up the smell. But wait, there's more for those who had access to a bit more luxury. There was also powdered perfumes and fragrant oils. Medieval people weren't completely without their sense of smell. It just didn't always come in the neat little bottles we have today. Powdered perfumes, often made from herbs or flowers, were rubbed into the skin or used to scent clothing. People even used scented oils, which were often made by infusing plant oils with herbs or spices. These oils were sometimes applied to the body in a kind of fragrant lotion. Though much like the sachets, these oils only mask the smell rather than addressing the underlying issue. And then there were the truly bizarre medieval treatments. Cowslip, for example, was believed to be a magical plant that could help with body odour. It was often used in potions that were believed to purify the body, leaving a pleasant scent behind. While cowslip had medicinal properties, it's unlikely that it worked any better than the herbal sachets and vinegar washes that were also floating around at the time. At the end of the day, medieval people didn't have the luxury of modern deodorants, perfumes or antiperspirants, but that didn't stop them from trying to control their body odour. From using herbal sachets to vinegar, alum and even cow manure, they did the best they could with what they had. Did it work? Probably not as well as today's products. But it's fascinating to see the creative ways people throughout history have managed to tackle the age-old problem of sweat and stink. So, next time you swipe on some deodorant, just remember your ancestors were probably out there rubbing vinegar on themselves while wearing wool in an attempt to stay fresh. We've come a long way after exploring the bizarre, often absurd, and downright painful beauty rituals of the Middle Ages. It's safe to say that modern beauty standards and products feel like a refreshing leap forward, from slathering soot on our teeth to rubbing horse dung into our hair. Medieval beauty practices were less about luxury and more about survival. In some ways, you've got to admire the dedication and resourcefulness people had, even if their methods weren't exactly the epitome of self-care. But looking back, it's easy to see how far we've come. You see, for all their efforts to look and feel beautiful, medieval folks were stuck in a time when healthcare, science and personal hygiene were in their infancy. They didn't have access to the advances we enjoy today. They didn't have dermatologists advising them on their skin, dentists caring for their teeth, or even access to the magical wonder of modern shampoo. Instead, they had herbal concoctions, medicinal powders, and strange mixtures that could do more harm than good. So, after all the pain of trying to make their hair shiny with horsehair wigs, burnt vine ash, and charcoal, the struggle of keeping their breath fresh by gargling urine and vinegar, and the desperation of scrubbing their teeth with soot, there's one thing that's clear: we are incredibly lucky to live now. Imagine trying to make a simple beauty routine in the Middle Ages, only to find yourself covered in ashes or herbs with side effects you didn't even know about. If you've ever spent 15 minutes agonising over which shampoo to choose, or debating whether you should splurge on a new facial mask, just remember you've got it made. So, what makes us lucky by comparison? Let's start with something simple: access to information. In medieval times, beauty was something passed down through word of mouth, often through superstitions, unscientific beliefs, and trial and error. If something worked, people used it. If it didn't, they probably just didn't talk about it as much. But today, we live in a time where we can easily access knowledge about beauty, skincare, and hair care. We can learn from dermatologists, cosmetologists, and scientific studies about the best ingredients for our skin and hair, whether it's retinol, hyaluronic acid, or keratin treatments. We know exactly what's in our products and how they work. We're not left guessing whether a magical potion made from vinegar and garlic will clear up our acne or leave us smelling like a salad. Moreover, we're living in a time of incredible innovation. Think about beauty technology. We now have advanced skincare treatments, laser teeth whitening, and top-tier hair products that can give us shiny, healthy hair without soaking it in oil or scrubbing it with soot. Products are often made with science-backed ingredients. And most importantly, they work. When was the last time you had to worry about your shampoo being made of dirt or ashes? Today, we have scientifically formulated products that help us achieve the beauty we want safely, efficiently, and effectively. Another luxury of the modern world is that we have access to a huge variety of beauty products and services. Back in medieval times, beauty was mostly reserved for the wealthy elite. The common folk had to make do with whatever they could get their hands on, whether it was herbal remedies, homemade cosmetics, or dyeing their hair with henna. Meanwhile, the wealthier classes had access to expensive perfumes, imported oils, and elaborate wigs today. However, beauty is much more democratic. Whether you're shopping at a luxury beauty store or picking up products from your local drugstore, there's a product out there for everyone. Regardless of income level, beauty treatments are now more affordable and accessible than ever before. This shift toward democratized beauty isn't just about products, it's about access to beauty knowledge as well. We're living in an era where anyone can hop online and watch YouTube tutorials, read beauty blogs, or even consult a dermatologist without breaking the bank. Even affordable beauty brands are increasingly using scientific formulas to help people feel beautiful while staying healthy. So, whether you're after a luxurious anti-aging cream or simply want a basic moisturizer, the choices available to us today are virtually limitless. But perhaps the biggest advantage we have over medieval beauty practices is the scientific understanding of health and hygiene. In medieval times, people didn't understand the role of bacteria in infection, nor did they grasp the importance of sun protection or hydration for maintaining youthful skin. Today, we know that sun exposure leads to premature aging, skin cancer, and dark spots, so we wear sunscreen to protect our skin. We understand that hydrating our skin and eating healthy plays a huge role in maintaining a radiant complexion. In short, we now know what our skin and body need to stay healthy, and we've developed the products and routines to make it happen. In contrast, medieval beauty was built on mysticism and superstition. People would use toxic powders to whiten their faces or plaster their skin with lead in an attempt to look paler and more aristocratic. They had no idea that these substances were slowly poisoning them. Many of the beauty practices used in medieval times weren't just ineffective, they were dangerous. Imagine putting lead-based makeup on your face every day without understanding the long-term health consequences, or using vinegar and horse dung to improve your skin only to end up with burns or irritation. Today, we have the advantage of understanding that healthy skin comes from a balanced diet, proper hydration, and avoiding toxic chemicals. Finally, there's the comfort factor. In medieval times, beauty treatments often involved pain, discomfort, and inconvenience. Women would endure tight corsets, painful hair pieces, and excruciating waxing sessions just to fit into society's beauty standards. They'd bleach their skin with toxic chemicals or scrub their teeth with soot, all in the name of looking good. Today, while we may still have to deal with shaving, waxing, or the occasional pimple, beauty treatments are far less grueling and uncomfortable. We can now visit a spa for a relaxing facial, enjoy a manicure without suffering, and even have pain-free hair removal thanks to laser treatments. Modern beauty is more about comfort than sacrifice. When we reflect on how far beauty has come, we can truly appreciate how much easier we have it today. We have access to scientifically backed products, safe beauty practices, and personalised treatments that work. We can preserve our natural beauty without subjecting ourselves to the bizarre and often harmful methods our medieval ancestors once had to endure. Beauty in the Middle Ages was a matter of survival, a way to fit in, make a statement, and mask the inevitable effects of poor hygiene and harsh living conditions. But today, we've figured out ways to look after our skin, hair, and teeth that don't involve poisonous chemicals, painful rituals, or a constant battle with lice. So, as we end our journey through medieval beauty practices, take a moment to appreciate the luxuries and conveniences we have at our fingertips today. The next time you brush your teeth with a minty toothpaste, slather on some sunscreen, or use a luxurious moisturiser, just remember the Middle Ages were a wild ride for beauty standards. But thanks to modern science, today's beauty routines are far safer, more effective, and a lot less likely to involve soot. You can rest easy knowing that beauty has come a long way from the chaos of medieval times.